Hey guys, how's it going? It's your captain, Yeehaw Yadam, and we're back with a new segment, Market Watch, and general talk down of the One Piece trading card game, where I'm at with the One Piece TCG. Now, it's been a while since we do a new segment, Market Watch, because honestly, there hasn't been many shifts that have warranted me to make these videos, and I just don't want to make these videos for like very little subtle changes, right? I'm sure that everyone that's watching the market and watches these videos is kind of up to date with what's kind of going on, but this one is kind of big enough that I have to go ahead and say my 2 cents and talk about it. So I believe on July 21st, 2023, which I think it was Friday, really early in the morning. So I'm a night shift worker. YouTube isn't my job. So I'm a night shift worker. And I think it was 3 a.m. Someone texted me and they were like, hey, by the way, boom, new ban list, which I was very surprised. I wasn't expecting this. We all saw in set 3 that Edward Newgate was he was terrorizing the Eastern meta. And because of this, we lost the Moby Dick and we also lost Kabaji. Which were very good hits, very important hits, because if we had to suffer through a Moby Dick, Izo, Whitebeard, I think a lot of us would have been very, very upset. And so they did this preemptively just to kind of please the player base so they didn't have to deal with it, which is excellent. Bandai does this kind of all the time, especially with other card games, so good on them. But what they didn't do, this is a restriction list that didn't happen in the East. They didn't see this, we did, so this is completely new territory for us, which is exciting. This is the first time we have new territory, something different from the Japanese meta, which is fantastic. Now, let's get on to the restrictions, right? So, as we all know, the red decks have very powerful cards attuned to them, and there's a lot of people in the community that are very vocal on many channels, Reddit, on the forums, on everything, saying that red just is too strong. And because of that, they went ahead and restricted some of the most powerful red cards that exist in the game. One of them being the 9-drop Whitebeard. So 9-drop Whitebeard is a oppressive card that came out in set 2, and he's kind of just been dominating the metagame for an entire set. Kind of bringing all the red decks into this weird mid-range and just carrying them all on his big, meaty back. And because of that, we have had kind of like a red supremacy. Not just because of him, but obviously there's a lot of factors. And people are just kind of tired of it. If you play one Whitebeard, that's very powerful. If you play a second one, you're like, holy moly. And the third one is, the game is just over, right? So back-to-back Whitebeards was super oppressive. But if you played one, you can still push and deal with it for games. So it wasn't a card that necessarily needed a ban. So they restricted it to 1. Not only that, but something important to know, and it's right here labeled in red, that all of these restrictions may be lifted upon the release of set 4. Now, why would Bandai do this? If you guys have kept up with the set 4 meta, Whitebeard, yes, still strong. Red, yep, still strong. But there are other contenders in the set 4. I know, man. How exciting is that? We've got the Doflamingo family. We've got Rebecca kind of dominating. We have a lot of decks that really got a breath of fresh air in set 4 that don't necessarily warrant these hits, and because red isn't as dominating in the following set. So we've lost Edward Newgate. The fact that it now becomes searchable, decks abuse it just by putting Izo in their deck. They kind of went ahead and put him to 1. The biggest issue, in my opinion, with Edward Newgate is the fact that he wasn't restricted. The fact that it said, you can play this card in any red deck, go ahead, have fun, where Big Mom, right, the 10-drop, which is a very, very powerful card, has a very clear stipulation that you must be a Big Mom Pirates. Kaido, 10-drop, says you must be an Animal Kingdom Pirates. These very powerful cards usually are restricted to their archetype, to their crew. But Newgate said, I'm part of everybody's crew, bro. Every red deck is a Whitebeard deck, which gets stale, right? Because it feels like every game plan is the same. Oh, they drop an Izo. Oh, they search the Izo off of Curly to Dawn. They found a Marco. Woo! So I guess that's where people were really upset about it. Me as a red player, sure, it is what it is. But we'll get to my opinions after. And then the next restricted card was Marco. Marco being an indestructible blocker, or a card that can't be removed and is a blocker unless you had weird removal that not many decks have the option to. Like, for example, Crocodile or any blue deck had the option to play the 3000 Worlds, which is a fantastic piece of removal specifically for Marco because it just bottom decks it, right? You go ahead and remove it from the game. Whereas other decks that have to rely on destruction, resting it, KO effects, they can't really deal with him because you would just pitch a random non-counterable card, summon him back, and then not only can he be attacking, not only can he be defending, he can be attacking, he defend, he protect, he attack, he do all of it. So honestly, way too powerful of a card, and I can see why they went ahead and limited it. And lastly, Radical Beam. So Radical Beam was a card that allowed red players to play as unga bunga as possible, right? You just take all your lives. I don't give a crap. Boom, hit you with my leader. And then now I'm at a low life threshold. Good luck trying to beat me because I have Radical Beam, right? So good luck trying to beat me because my hand size is huge. All my cards replace themselves. Good luck trying to beat me because my cards are well statted. And good luck trying to beat me. I have the best counters in the game, right? So with all those factors, understandably so, Bandai went ahead and restricted these 3 cards, which is really, really interesting. How that will shake up the metagame, let's go ahead and start talking about it, right? So obviously, these are the cards that got restricted. That was from the website. These are just maybe a little bit more plain to see. These were the 3 restrictions that happened. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just call these cards, as a friend went ahead and called it yesterday, the Holy Trinity of Red. Just because they're restricted to 1 doesn't mean that they're gone. And just because they're not gone, we're still going to try to abuse them in Red as much as possible. This card, obviously, is searchable by 2 means. You got Nami as well as Buggy. Pick your poison. And this cards as well are going to be searched by Iso, right? So as long as you're playing some amount of searchers, who didn't get hit? Curly did Dawn. We didn't hit any of the very powerful red 2Ks, so we're still going to use them to other utmost potential because they're still here with us. So who were the biggest winners and obviously who were the biggest losers from this list? The cards affected obviously were red cards, so who gets hurt? Basically every single red deck except the hybrid red decks, right? So for example, Law. Law didn't get touched on this list in any means, right? It's a very strong deck. It's been very prevalent in the meta. But we didn't see any hits to any of the cards they use, except for Radical Beam, possibly. A lot of lists have even opted not to play that card anymore. So, basically 0 hits there. Zoro, yes, now there is a list of Zoro that has been floating around that's very mid-range. You play Izo, you play the 4-drop Marco, the 5-drop Marco, the Whitebeard, and you're just like this weird mid-range deck using Buggy to find all your spells. And there was that more mid-range Zoro deck. There's Ace, who obviously used Radical Beam as its primary defense tool. Whitebeard has some of its finishers. Some do, some don't, you know, but like I preferred playing the Whitebeard. And obviously Marco was its best defensive tool. So Ace, huge hit. Luffy, what was the best play that Luffy could do? Whitebeard, next turn, Whitebeard, Luffy effect, swing at you with a Whitebeard for powered up effect. You know, dropping back-to-back Whitebeards was kind of Luffy's entire game plan, right? It really struggles being like an aggressive deck, because if you're being an aggressive deck, you're probably just playing Zoro. It was this mid-range deck that the idea of Luffy was develop a card, hit you, develop a card, hit you, and eventually I'll use my big powerful cards and removal to overwhelm you and beat you over the long game. Losing Radical Beam, huge hit to Luffy as well, because that was its primary defensive tool as well. And Whitebeard obviously lost almost 4 ofs. They played 4 ofs of Marco, 4 ofs of Radical Beam, and 4 ofs of the 9-drop. So they had the most to lose. And I do believe that this hit, besides these, you know, the decks that really got hurt, I'm going to put them as these. Zoro did get like a slight push, but these guys got really hurt. And what matters the most is that these decks, funnily enough, had a good matchup into this guy, right? The whole purpose of Luffy and Ace, in my opinion, being part of the metagame, their part in the ecosystem of the OPTCG was to kind of put a stop to Newgate. Newgate was kind of their main target. That was their prey. You know, that was the alpha of the whole set was Whitebeard, and then we had Luffy and Ace kind of just hunting those players trying to play that deck, right? And that's what I used to top in the Texas Regional. I thought Luffy was a great choice because not only could he deal with some of the slower decks, because everyone had to become mid-range because Edward Newgate demands that every deck become mid-range. Luffy kind of said, I'm going to beat the mid-range decks because I'm a better mid-range deck, and I'm also going to beat Newgate, right? So it was a very powerful option. Ace is very similar to that. And with the loss of Newgate, and I'm going to say that because, of course, obviously these hits were very impactful to him in and of itself. Sure, you can still see Edward Newgate players play the deck with different options, but obviously it's not as strong. And the deck being not as strong means that it will be less of a meta contender. Being less of a meta contender means that these decks simultaneously, by also losing powerful cards in their deck, lose their best prey. So we're kind of biggest L's taken are right here with this ban list. Funnily enough, I'm going to now talk about, so obviously these guys got hit, but they can live, they switch, we overcome and adapt, right? The decks will become different. Not saying they're going to be lost from the metagame, but we will definitely adapt to what comes moving forward. So let's talk about Newgate, right? So Newgate, what did Newgate do? And this is an important topic. What did Newgate do in the meta? Sure, he oppressed the meta. He was so powerful that every deck had to build around Newgate. Right, Zoro, for example. Zoro did not have a good Newgate matchup. I know. Anyone that hasn't heard that, welcome to the OPTCG meta. Zoro had a terrible Whitebeard matchup. Why? Because Zoro wants to hit you for 5. It can easily hit you for 5. What can't Zoro do? Hit you for 6. Because each character that Zoro now has to make a 6K is a tax of 1 Dawn that they didn't have to do. This leader, being a 6K, just said, Your Curly D will now require 2 Dawns instead of 1. Every single 3k card in your deck, Buggy, Curly D, Vistas, now require 1 additional Dawn per card to declare an attack on me, which is huge. That's like something you don't think of, but that's just the starting piece of the issue with the matchup. Not only that, this deck had infinity counters, infinity defense, and once it went 9-drop Whitebeard, so that tax that the Zoro deck initially had, it's kind of tripled. So their turns were literally do nothing past. Their best play in going Whitebeard past the Zoro was they play Whitebeard. If they didn't play Whitebeard, what are they doing? Swinging at me for like 9? Cool, I pitch a 2k counter. Would you like to pass your turn now? Or it really devastated that matchup. So now that Zoro has no reason to care about Whitebeard, it doesn't have to be this mid-range deck where it was forced to play Marcos just to have a possible attacker versus Whitebeard. It doesn't have to play these 9-drops, this top end of the game. It can go back to its really degenerate playstyle of becoming a hyper-aggressive deck that capitalizes on its very powerful 1-drops and leader mechanics of flooding the board, right? So they go in now from a deck that kind of had to be forced to be mid-range is now saying, wait a minute, you just stopped being an oppressor? Cool, now I'm the oppressor. Now we all have to shift from being this hyper defensive, hyper mid-range format into one that has to deal with a hyper aggressive red deck, which is, in my opinion, we're losing one evil and gaining another. So let's talk about the biggest losers from this set, right? So what are the decks that definitely didn't lose anything, but simultaneously got hit by this, right? So now that we're under the mindset of Zoro is kind of something you have to now respect, kind of have to deal with, and we've always had to respect it. It's always been a very powerful deck, but it's been a different deck. Now it has to go back to I don't know if you guys have seen the version that won a regional recently that's been going around, very aggressive, 0 events, balls to the wall Zoro deck. We're going to have to expect more of that in the days to come. So simultaneously, who loses that? Law, right? So Law didn't get hit by this list, but what was Law's, what was their purpose in the meta? They were the same purpose as Luffy and Ace, in my opinion. They capitalized on the new gates, right? What can Law do very, very well? Hit you for 6, because guess what half of the cards in the deck are, or the best cards in their deck, is Trafalgar Laws. And Trafalgar Laws are statted as 6Ks. They even would play Roanoke Zoro 4-drop Vanilla as a 6K because they want to hit that leader. Its whole purpose is I hit you for 6, I move on. Starter deck Nami started making a resurgence in Law because now I can hit you for 6 more reasonably with my leader and my characters. So what did Law lose to? What was its biggest downfall? Zoro, a hyper-aggressive deck that just ignored the board and went face, was always something that was very difficult for Law. Not only that, but if decks lose Radical Beam and they opt to play Gum Gum Red Hawk, Law also double loses, right? Because now they have a card that consistently hits their board. And not only that, because Zoro's playing this hyper-aggressive meta, guess what cards just go into the Zoro deck at 4-ofs? Vista and Marco. And Vista and Marco are really good for the mirror match and now really good simultaneously versus Law. Not only that, but if you want to, you can play Fire Fist in your deck, which just makes the Law matchup even more trivial. So as funnily enough as Law was, didn't get hit and you're like, Law best deck, man, did Law take a really big hit by the meta shifting? Well, this is just a speculation from me, and we'll have to see moving forward. But I do believe that, in a weird way, Law got the short end of the stick. Garp, I mean, I know this is not a meta deck, but obviously in a much more hyper-aggressive format, Garp takes a hit too. They lost their Radical Beam, a huge card in Garp in my opinion. So simultaneously hit Garp, making a hyper-aggressive format really bad for Garp. Magellan loved mid-range. What was Magellan's purpose in the meta? I curve out my 5-drop Magellans. You can't play your 9-drop. Big gaming. Okay, what if I don't have the 9-drop? 5k, 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 5k. And Magellan's going to be in a really, really tough spot. Smoker, again, Smoker has always struggled with hyper-aggressive decks, such as Zoro, Monkey D. Luffy, that were lowered to the ground. So I believe that's going to be the same thing. And not only that, but you know which card also kind of simultaneously disappeared from the meta because of this? Fujitora. Fujitora, aka Isho, the 8-drop. What was its purpose? You're playing Whitebeard, lose 2 cards. And now I have a 9k on the board, right? So that was a great card that came out in set 3 to combat Whitebeard that now all of a sudden doesn't matter. Probably you won't see it in many decks because if you're playing versus black, you can just keep your hand at around 5 and it will never hit you. It'll never come down. The only deck that couldn't afford to play around Fujitora was Whitebeard, and now that deck probably doesn't exist as much. So simultaneously, Smoker and Black in general got hit because of that's why I put Rob Lucci here. Nami, did great versus mid-range. The more mid-range the format, the better Nami can do because they're slower to develop. But what if everyone just develops faster now? Because everyone has to adapt, so everyone comes down on the curve. Nami struggles with that. Iceberg, again, a deck that would prefer longer games, more mid-range, now gets simultaneously hit. Rob Lucci, as I said, with the loss of Fujitora. I mean, the CP9 engine's great at dealing with aggression. Kaku is going to do really good, so I don't think this guy ends up being on the biggest loser. I might have put him here by mistake, but he was supposed to be on the biggest winners because the CP9 engine could be used with Erdor, Kaku, and all that good stuff to kind of deal with aggression, but sometimes it's not even enough. Big Mom. What was Big Mom's whole shtick, or what's Yellow's whole shtick? Mid-range. It wants to go ahead and capitalize on slow format, so I can go 8 drop, 10 drop, 10 drop. Yeah, right? That's the whole purpose. With losing that, God, do we lose some more. Not only that, but my favorite thing about playing Black Yellow Big Mom was going Fujitora on 8, 10 drop on 10. That curve was really, really strong. Having access to Fujitora, being able to drop or decrease the cost of everything and pairing that up with the Katakuri 8 drop was fantastic. We lose that as well, which is not very, very great. Monkey D. Luffy will have to adapt and become like a more aggressive deck, which if we're becoming a more aggressive red deck, we're just becoming Zoro, and at that point, what are we doing? Crocodile. With the loss of Marco from the format, we lose Crocodile. Crocodile, again, loves long games, loves the mid-range. What was the best thing in the Crocodile deck? The Pacifista engine, because it summoned 6Ks from the deck that threatened Whitebeard. Now, yeah, you summon a 6K from the deck, that's great, but decks are going to be playing more removal, more pistols. It's going to go back to that form of the meta, and we're just going to have to simultaneously disregard Crocodile. A deck that had so much promise coming into set 3, where we're like, wow, this is an off-meta deck that we haven't seen in two formats, is coming back, now disappears once again. And Kaido, oh my goodness, I mean, we haven't really seen Kaido in a while, but we know exactly what happens when Kaido faces Zoro. So, biggest winners, obviously I forgot to mention Rob Lucci here, but Green simultaneously is like, well, what has Zoro always struggled with? 8-drop Eustace Captain Kid? Sounds great. Being able to make a card that says stop and you must deal with me. Yes, they have removal. They have Gordon plus pistol, Gordon or Otama pistol. Like, those cards still exist in the meta, but this deck and these decks in general have really good matchups into these hyper aggressive decks because they have cards that rest their opponent's characters. Usually you can't really interact with the characters that their opponent summons. They usually summon their board, hit you with the leader, and then eventually they tap their board sideways once they build it. But what if they can't build the board because you're playing cards like Nekomamushi, Yamato, Izo, restanding it with a Trafalgar Law 5-drop, using it again, using hero ability as your aggressive options, using 8-drop as a stall. If you use the film package, you have a way to flood the board. There's a lot that goes on in Green that just genuinely beats that game plan. And funnily enough, if that game plan is the new meta standard, that's kind of cool that we at least see Green back. But in simultaneously us seeing Green again, right? So not only did Blue struggle because now decks aren't as mid-range, and Crocodile's like, well, mid-range is back. If the 8-drop Eustace Captain Kid comes back into the meta, Blue is super gone. Goodbye, Blue, Doflamingo, Crocodile. Any version of Blue just cannot beat the 8-drop Eustace Captain Kid. And if that card does make a resurgence, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'd also just say that Blue is completely eliminated, which is unfortunate, right? This is a deck that we have ignored for a little bit, right? Because we have access to cards like the 9-drop, as well as Marco's, that we can just simultaneously beat this card. We have removal for the card. You know, Black is trying to like play all these cards that help with the removal. So obviously these decks will lose, probably not exactly lose, but they have a tougher time versus Black's removal versus Ace's removal. But versus a hyper aggressive format like Zoro, they're going to have a really solid time. So funnily enough, we might see a resurgence of Green, which is cool. Green left in OPO3, but now it may be back. And lastly, we're going to talk about a couple cards in the Market Watch, right? So obviously I just want to see exactly how impactful restricting a card would be. And let's talk about exactly this one, right? So this is one that you'll see the biggest dip. This just took a jump to $20. I think everyone realized that, yeah, Edward Newgate's still the best deck. And in the matter of a couple days, it dropped beyond half of its original price, right? So from $20 all the way down to $6 is huge, right? So all the people that needed to play this card at $4, now you can pick your play sets up or pick up a one of, and you can play it and you can be ready to play for your deck, which is super duper cool. Not only that, Marco went from $50 Altart to $27, so it lost 50% of its value just by being restricted, and I don't see a reason for it to really come anywhere back up. It could continue to drop down a little bit, but seeing a card at $20 is really good. But also, what happens to the set 2 boxes? Set 2, not Pillars of Strength, Paramount War now get simultaneously nerfed because the best cards in Paramount War were Altart Marco, Altart 9-drop, Altart Whitebeard Leader are now going to be dropping in price. So what happens to the box? The box is going to have to drop value, or other cards in the box are going to have to gain value. And that's an interesting thing that we're going to have to wait to see for a couple of days to see exactly what happens. And lastly, I just want to show you guys where set 3 is. Not much has moved. Obviously, Ace dropped just a little bit because, as we can see here, it's going to go ahead and have to take a hit because of that. But other than that, all of this was very much expected. So that's my thoughts. That's what I believe is going to happen in the meta, my opinions on what's going on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this very long discussion forum thing about what happened with the restriction list. If you like this sort of video, make sure to hit a like. If you want to discuss this, and this is a great place to discuss, talk to me in the comment section. What do you think is going to happen? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Am I crazy on my predictions? And lastly, if you guys haven't joined the Pirate Crew and are thinking of joining, hit that subscribe button for more OP TCG content and videos. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.